Hi friends, in this video we will understand what are the bean scopes, that is what are the Spring Bean scopes. Okay, so it is very important to understand Spring Bean scopes provided by the Spring framework. So what are the Spring Bean scopes basically? Actually, the scope of a bean defines the life cycle and visibility of the bean. What do you mean by this? Life cycle and visibility. So life cycle in the sense when it is created, when it will be destroyed by the Spring container. When it has to be created, when it has to be destroyed. Visibility means the accessibility. So how it is visible to other beans, we can say. Okay. So this is very important concept. Okay, we will understand this. So what are the different types of bean scopes we have in Spring? So far we have 6 bean scopes, 6 types, that is singleton, prototype, request, session, application, WebSocket. Okay, one by one we will discuss in detail practically. Okay, so let's start with singleton scope. So when we say singleton scope, when we define a bean as a singleton scope, then what will happen is Spring IoC container will create only one instance, that is only one object in the entire IoC container, that is in the entire application context. There will be only one object for that particular class, and it can be shared across the entire application. So if you want this particular object, you can ask the IoC container, it will give the same object. It won't create a new one for you. It will create one and it will keep in the memory, and whenever you ask for it, it will give the same object to you. So it will save the memory, right? No need to create multiple objects. If you want only one object to do certain action, some action, then we can define that bean as a singleton. Okay, and if you don't mention the scope, for example, you are creating a bean, you are configuring the bean. If you don't mention the scope, then what will happen is it is by default it is a singleton only. This is also one interview question you can expect, right? Even I was asked. The interviewer asked me what are the scopes available in Spring. Then I listed the scopes. Then he asked what is the default one. If you don't mention the scope, what is the default scope it will take? Means we can answer as singleton scope. Singleton is the default one. Okay, so basically what will happen is, if you look at this diagram, so here we have 3 components: user service, authentication service, and email service. And we have cache manager class. This is also one class. So these are 3 classes, and cache manager is one more class. So I defined it as a singleton scope. So whenever user service request for the cache manager, whenever it asks Spring IoC container for cache manager, what will happen is it will create one object, and that object only it will return to the user service. And when authentication service also asks the same cache manager one object, then what it will do, the same object it will return. It won't create a new one. It will return the same one. And even if there is a third component, there is a third class, if it asks for the same cache manager instance, then it will return the same cache manager object only. It won't create a new one. Okay, so this is a singleton. So in the entire container, if you define the cache manager as singleton scope, then definitely it will create only one instance per IoC container. If you have multiple IoC containers, and for example there is one more IoC container, there also we have cache manager, then here we will have 2 instances, one instance for this IoC container and the other instance for that IoC container. But within the container there will be only one instance for that particular class. Okay, so this is singleton scope. And if you look at this diagram, like code wise, let's say I have 3 classes, okay, 3 components. These are created by Spring only anyway. And also I have a dependency in the 3 classes. I have a dependency on cache manager. Here cache manager, here cache manager. I am auto varying it. So I have a separate class. I have defined it as singleton. Okay, so if I don't define it as a singleton, by default it is singleton only anyway, right? So what will happen here is Spring container will create an object cache manager, the same object it will inject into these 3 classes, because I defined it as singleton, right? So the same object it will inject into these 3 classes here. This is what we need to understand. Okay, so let's see it practically. We'll play with singleton now, how it works. Okay, let's get into the IDE. Right, so here I created 3 classes. Cache manager, I defined the scope as singleton, and email service, this is one component, it is depending on the cache manager. User service also depending on the cache manager. Okay, and you can remove this, and authentication service also depending on the cache manager. So these 3 classes are depending on the cache manager. Okay, auto wiring it. So cache manager is basically a singleton. Okay, so how we define scope using the annotations means, in the annotation configuration means @scope annotation. This one, using the @annotation you can define the scope. Even if you give like this also it will work, no need to give the value also. Like this also if you can give, it will work. Okay, value equals to also it will work, both are same. Okay, yeah. So when I define like this, here I have created one application context using annotation config application context. Okay, so this is how configuration I am passing. What is the configuration? I am not configuring anything here, but from here I am doing the component scan from Spring demo package. From Spring demo package I am scanning all these 4. Okay, so anyway, since we have annotated with @component, it will create the object for it, right? Now, so I have created an IOC container right here using the annotation config application context. I have created the Spring container. So this is the instance. We can store the instance here, right? So now what we will do, we'll just test it. Okay, what we will test it? Cache manager we will test it, because cache manager we defined it as singleton, right? So let's test it. So what you will do is, we will request the same object from this application context, and we will see how it is returning the instance. Okay, let's start with the cache manager. Cache manager equals to application context dot get bean, right? So I want the instance of cache manager. So what I will do, I'll say like this. So what it will do, it will return the cache manager class, right? Instance, right? So it is returning. Okay, so okay, it is returning. I will print the instance. Okay, cache manager I will print here. So let's see, we have to get the string representation of the object, right? Yes, we got the string representation of the object. Perfect. So what I will do is, again I will request the same, again I will request the instance. Now what I will do is, I will copy this, I will paste here. So I will make it as cache manager 2. Okay, again I will print that, this one, cache manager 2 I will print. Okay, cache manager 2 I will print now. Second time I am asking again, I am asking to for the bean cache manager second time from the application context, from the IOC container. What it has to give? It has to give the same instance to you, right? Is it giving the same instance here? Both are same, right? This one, this one. So it is returning the same instance again and again. So this is called singleton nature. If you any number of times you ask, it will give the same instance only, same object only it will give. And this is one. Okay, demonstration. And if you see one more, I told you, right, it is one singleton instance, that is one instance per container. If I create one more container, let's say I will create one more container now, I will call it as application context 2. Okay, so everything these steps I will copy here. Now I will do from application context 2. Okay, 2. That means from the application context 2 I am retrieving the beans. Okay, this I will call it as 3, I will call this one as 4, and this 3 I will print, 4 I will print here. Okay, now what should happen? This is a different application context, right? So different instance will be there, right? Now see, yes. So if you see this third one, this is a different instance, right? It is different from the first two, right? Why it is different? Even though this is singleton, why it is different? Because it belongs to separate container. It belongs to other container, that is other application context. So that is different. Again, from the same application context to when I am requesting again, what is happening? The same instance from that container it is returning. So this is nothing but that's why in the definition what I said, in the definition, if you see, come to the definition, only one instance of the bean is created per Spring IoC container, right? So that is what here, one instance per container. So one instance per the first container and the second instance for the second container. So this is how the singleton bean is created. From the container, if you ask multiple times, it will give the same object only. If you go to the other container, it will give a different object. But from that container also, if you ask multiple times, it will give the same object only. Here, that is what happening, right? Yes, this is called singleton nature. This is what singleton means. Okay? Yes. Now, I want to demonstrate one more thing here. I will just remove all this. Now what we will do is, authentication service we are injecting the cache manager. In the email service also we are injecting, in the user service also we are injecting. Are we injecting the same instance? We are not injecting. Spring container will inject, right? Is it injecting the same instance into these classes? Let's demo that. Okay. So what you have to do for that, first we have to get the, first we will get the authentication service object. Okay. Authentication service. Okay. Authentication service equals to, from the application context I will get the bean. Bean, right? Authentication service dot class. We can move this to the next line. Okay. So this is one. Next, what we can get? Cache email service also, right? Or user service will get. User service equals to application context dot get bean, right? Yes. So again here user service dot class, right? Now similarly, can we get email service also? Email service. First we need to import this. Yes. So email service equals to application context dot get bean email service dot class, right? So we got 3 instances, right? So from these 3 I want to check, are we injecting the same cache manager or not? Okay. For that, what we have to do, we have to print and see. Okay. What I will do is authentication service dot get cache manager. I will print this and see. Okay. Similarly, I will print from the user service and from the email service. So I'm printing and seeing, okay, whether that is the instance is same or not. I'm just checking now. Okay. See here, same instance only, right? So inside these 3, authentication service, user service and email service, we have the same cache manager instance only. So this is nothing but the singleton nature. Okay. What is the advantage of it doing like this singleton? You know, right? In the Java design patterns, singleton design pattern, what it will do? What is the advantage? It will save the memory. If you are not, if you want to share a single object across the entire application, we can go for singleton. No need to create duplicate objects, because it will give some service actually. It won't contain basically the state. It will contain only behaviors to perform some operations. So to perform some operations, in order to create duplicate objects, we create single object, and that's object we use across the application. We share it across the application. That is that is where we use the singleton pattern, right? So here also the same singleton design pattern. Why we use? If we know, then here also why we are creating singleton beans, we will understand, right? Yes. So this is about singleton. Perfect. Okay. So I understood what is singleton, right? So After understanding this, I felt good. Okay, but what happened, recently I was asked one interesting interview question on Singleton only. What I was asked, I want to let you know. Okay, the interview question is like this: what is the difference between the Singleton object created by the Spring container and the Singleton object created by you? So what is the difference between these two Singleton objects? The interviewer asked me. Can you think of this? Can you guess what is the difference between these two? So simple. The Singleton object created by the Spring container is Singleton object, that means single instance per IoC container, right? It is single object, that is single instance per the container. If have multiple containers, again we will have multiple Singleton objects per container, right? Whereas the Singleton object created by you means if I create my own Singleton class, then definitely I will make it Singleton throughout the application, right? It is not per container. Throughout the application means what is the life cycle of it? It will be one per JVM, we can say. When JVM is shut down, then the Singleton object will be destroyed. And here when the Spring container is closed, then the Singleton object is destroyed, right? And when the Singleton object created by me will be destroyed when the JVM is shut down. That means Singleton object created by me is single instance per JVM, and the Singleton object created by the container is a single instance per container. So this is how you can answer. Okay, the answer is Singleton object created by Spring container is one instance per container, that is single instance per container, whereas the Singleton object I created is one instance per JVM. So this is instance per JVM, that is instance per container. So this is the difference. That's it. Okay. Okay. Now we will understand the next scope. Okay. That is prototype. So prototype scope is something different, right? It is different from Singleton. How it is different? So prototype, a new instance of the bean is created whenever it is requested. That means whenever we request the Spring container to provide the object for a prototype bean or a prototype class, it will always create a new object for us. Okay, it won't share the existing object. It will create a whole new object for us. Always it will create a new object. Whenever we request, hey Spring container, please give me the object of this class, then definitely it will create a new one for you and it will provide that. Okay, this is what prototype is. Okay, so it is not shared across the components. Okay, each client receives a new instance. So client is nothing but the other component which is requesting the bean. Okay, so when it is used, then when it is useful, this kind of scenario, creating always new objects, when it will be useful, that is stateful beans. When we say stateful beans or beans with mutable state, means what? We will modify that. We will create a new object and then we will modify that object, maybe setting some properties, let's say. Okay, in that cases we will create the class as prototype. That means we define the scope as prototype. Okay, let's check this diagram. So for example, I have again the same user service, authentication service, email service is requesting the cache manager. This time they want different instances, let's say. Then if you define the cache manager scope as prototype, then the Spring container will always create a new object. Let's say for user service, it is creating an instance cache manager 1 from this cache manager class. When authentication service is requesting the cache manager instance, it is creating a whole new object for authentication service. Okay, it is creating a whole new object and providing that object. And for email service also, it is creating a new object again. So always whenever something requests object for the particular class which is of type prototype, that means if we define the scope as prototype, the container will always create a new object. Okay, so this is what prototype is. If you look at this diagram, here I am defining the cache manager as prototype. That means the scope I am defining as prototype. So what will happen? Here I am auto wiring. We have three classes: user service, authentication service, email service, right? So I am asking for cache manager. So what it will do, the container will inject always a new objects only. For cache manager it will inject a new object, for cache manager here also new object, here also new object. So it will always create a new object whenever it is requested, if we define the scope as prototype, right? This is very important. Let's dive into the IDE and see practically. Okay, so this is where we are discussing the singleton, right? So for example, here if you see, we injected, right, into the three classes we injected with singleton, right? Cache manager we defined it as singleton, right? Even if you remove this, it is singleton only, because by default it is singleton, it is injecting the same instance, right? Now what if I change it to prototype? Okay, what is prototype? That is prototype, right? Now let's run it and see. Okay, with singleton we got the same instances, right, 3 times here. That means injected the same injection dependency, that is same bean into the same object into the 3 classes. Now I changed it to prototype, right? How it will behave we will see now. Yes, we got different instances, right? This is called what prototype is. So it created 3 objects, one for authentication service, one for user service, one for email service, and injected the cache manager. So I'm actually getting the cache manager using the getter method. That cache manager instance, when I print it and see here, easily we can see that, clearly we can see that the instances are different. That means Spring container created 3 objects for these 3 classes. Interesting, right? This is called prototype is. So whenever you request, let's say here I'm taking, whenever I request cache manager, let's say I have defined it as a prototype, right? Cache manager 1, let's say. Okay, application context dot get bean. For example, I am requesting for cache manager only, right? Dot class. So what it will do, it will print, I mean it will give some instance, right? I will print that cache manager instance, it will return, right? I will just print it and see we got something. Again I will request now. Okay, again I will request from the same application context only. I will make it as 2, here also 2. Second time I am requesting. Okay, let's print. See, second time when I request the same cache manager, second time when I request Spring container to give me the instance of cache manager, then what it is giving, it is creating a new object. This is a new one. This is not same as the previous one, right? These 2 are different now, different objects, right? Yes, 2 different objects it is giving. So this is called what prototype is. If you remove this or if you change it to singleton, it will return single one. But if it is prototype, it is giving 2 different objects whenever I request. For example, if I request again, let's say at the third time I will request. Okay, third time 3. Okay, I got a different object again, right? Yes, this is what we need to understand. Okay, so this is called what prototype is. Congratulations. So far we have learned what is the singleton scope and what is prototype scope. Yeah, so now the next scope we will understand. Okay, so we are done with singleton and prototype, right? So the next one is request scope. So whatever the scopes we learned, singleton and prototype, they work with standalone Java applications and also web applications. Okay, but request scope works with only web aware Spring application context. That means only in web applications. Okay, so we created application context right just now, that is not web aware Spring application context, because that is standalone Java application, right? This is a standalone Java application we are doing, right, testing, right? So but this request works with only web applications. Okay, not here. Here we cannot create the scope actually, request scope actually. For example, if you come here it won't work. If you make it like this, it won't work. Okay, so request scope, remember, request scope works with only web aware Spring application context, because the definition of request scope is itself like that. For example, if you see this, a new instance of the bean is created for each HTTP request. So where we use HTTP request? In web applications, right? So that's what. Okay, so whenever for each HTTP request, Spring will create a new instance of the bean of type request scope. Okay, this is what we need to understand. Okay, so where it is suitable, where we can use this, it is suitable for beans holding request specific data. So for each HTTP request, you want to create a new object and you want to store some data into it, and after the completion of the HTTP request, if you want to destroy it, it's not required anymore, right? Once it returns the HTTP response, then we don't do anything with the request data, right? So in such cases we use the request scope. Okay, it always creates a new object for each request and it provides the new object, so we can modify it according to our needs. Okay, then done. Once we are done with it, once we return the response, the request scope object will be destroyed by the container. It won't be in the memory anymore after the HTTP request. This one we will see in practically. Okay, let's get into the IDE. Okay, so let's close this one. So for this, to demo this, I have set up one Spring Boot project. So this is basically Spring Boot project, because why I choose Spring Boot means Spring Boot is very easy because of the auto configuration and the starter dependencies. It is very quick for me to demo you, so that's why I took this. Anyway, we will start Spring Boot setting up Spring Boot application. Anyway, we will, once we start Spring Boot course, then we will discuss there, but just now for understanding we will go through this. Okay, so here this is a starting point, scope demo application. So you forget about this commented code, this one we'll use it later, but normally in Spring Boot we start like this. We will have an annotation called Spring Boot application. Okay, so internally embedded Tomcat server will be there anyway. So internally dispatcher servlet will be configured. Okay, because in web application, Spring based web applications, we use dispatcher servlet, right, as a front controller. So anyway, so that we will discuss later, but now just we will understand the request scope. Okay, so I have created a controller, REST controller. Okay, so here we have we are auto wiring a request data class. So if you see this is a Pojo class. Okay, model class. Okay, it's a component, it is a Spring based Spring component. So now I want to make this as a request. So actually if you see this, let's run this one and see what will happen. We will see. Okay, so let's run this one and see. Okay, how to run this one. This is the main method, right? Here we have to run. Let's run this. Okay, just it is starting the server. Okay, we need a browser. Okay, so if you see here, localhost 8080, it will run. Okay, so what is the path? So if you go to the controller, demo controller, so it is demo, right? So if you give demo like this, it is actually giving the instance, object instance I'm printing. Okay, so if you see this requested data, it is of which type? I have not mentioned the scope here, right? So if you don't mention the scope, what will happen? By default it is singleton, right? So for singleton it is a single, right? Per container it is single instance only. So any number of times if you request this, reload this, what will happen? It will return the same instance only, right? It is not changing, right? So this is a singleton, right? Anyway, so now I want to make it to request. So what I will do is request. How I have to do? I have a scope annotation and I will pass values equals to request, right? So will it do it? Will it do? Let's check whether it will run or not. Let's restart the server. Okay, is it giving any issues or not? We will check it out. Okay, let's run it. We are getting some exception, right? What is this exception? error creating bean with name request data. Scope request is not active for the current thread. Consider defining a scoped proxy for this bean if you intend to refer it to it from a singleton. So actually I am referring this. I am injecting request data into a singleton bean. So singleton bean is always unique. That means it won't change. It is a single instance per container. But request data is not like that, right? Request data has to be changed always. For each HTTP request, it will create a new object, right? So the new object has to be injected into the singleton. How it is possible practically? Because singleton object is created once and it will be in the memory, right? While creating it, we need to inject the request data. But request data has to be changed always, right? So singleton referring request is a complicated thing here. How can we change the dependency object always? Because singleton object once created, we cannot change it, right? So demo controller is a singleton object. We cannot, it won't be changed again. But request data has a dependency here. It has to be changed. How it is possible to change? If it is created as a singleton, we should not be changed, right? So for this, Spring has provided one solution, that is proxy. So actually what it will do is, it won't create the object for request data directly. It will create, instead of that, it will create a proxy for request data and it will inject that proxy into the request data. So whenever I use request data, internally that proxy will make the take the call and it will forward that request to the actual request data object. So the proxy concept is there here. So it is asking to create the scoped proxy. Scoped proxy means the proxy for scope. Okay. So what we have to do for that? So simple use comma. We have a proxy attribute here, proxy mode. We can pass like this scoped proxy mode, and we can give target class like this. So if you mention like this, it will, what it will do is, it will actually create a proxy for request data, and that proxy object it will inject into this request data. That's what it will do internally. We can check that also. We can debug that also. How can we debug? What I will do is, I will, if you do field injection, it is difficult for us to check this, to debug this. What I will do is, I will use the constructor injection to check this. Okay, for that what I will do is, I will create a constructor here. Okay, so I have generated a constructor here, and I'm just removing this auto word. I'm just commenting this one. Okay, and we will debug this one and we will see. Okay, I'm just saving it. Okay, we'll debug this. Okay, debug as Java application. Did we add debug point? I'm adding it here. Added. No. So here if you see, debug point came here. Is it really creating the instance for request data? We will see now. Are you able to see this? Request data $ symbol spring cglib $0. What does it mean? Spring cglib. This is not the instance name, right? Instance name, how it looks like, at the rate something hash code it will come, right, normally. But here what it is a proxy. This proxy type is cglib. So what is this proxy cglib? We will understand later, but remember, this is not an actual instance. It is a proxy instance. It is actually creating an object, proxy object for the actual request data, and it is injecting here. If we continue, we are good. It is starting the server. We didn't get any error, right? Yes. So this is how we need to create. Okay, now we will test it. Okay, so for each request I need to get new object, right? Yes, I'm making the request. Okay, see, I got new object, request data 1E13 D8 B3. So what is happening under the hood is, whenever I'm making the call to demo controller, I'm just returning what I'm doing. I'm doing request data dot toString method, right? So what it is doing is, when I call the toString method, what it is happening is, it is actually creating a new request data object. That means the proxy object is creating a new request data object, and it is making call to the toString object. I mean toString method. This is what we need to understand. Okay, so it is giving. So if I make another request, I'm reloading this page. Observe this one. Observe this one. It will change now. Change it, right? Now I got 63584ED7. Again I will make one more request. it got changed, right? So for every request this will change. You can see now, I'm just zooming it. For every request that value will changing or not, right? These many objects getting created, and they will be destroyed also once the request is complete. For each request it is generating a new object, right? It is creating a new object. So this is what we need to understand. Okay, now it is fine. I want to show you that once we get the response here, this request or data object is getting destroyed. That means it is being cleared from the memory. That's what I want to show you. How I can show you? Simple. Whenever Spring Container destroys it, it will call a lifecycle method, right? So that lifecycle method we will add here, one lifecycle method, destroy method, and we will understand whether it is getting destroyed or not. Okay. Request data object is removed, is being removed. Okay, we can add this. We have three ways, right? That we have understood, right? We have three ways of adding destroy methods. So I will use pre-destroy annotation here. Okay, now I will start the server. So anyway, see now, whenever I make a request, what will happen, we will see. I'm making a request. Anyway, this will be created, right? And also once I get the response, I'll get a sysout that request data object is being removed. Okay, now see, refreshed and I got a new one, right? Now see here, request data object is being removed. That means once it is created, once I get the response, so the request is complete, right? So once the request is completed, it is removing the what is this object? Request type object, right? That is scope is request, right? So request scope object is getting removed from the memory. So this is what interesting thing. But for prototype, it won't remove from the memory. That's what you need to understand. If it is a prototype, it won't remove from the memory. Prototype will be always there. We have to manually remove it. Okay, but request type scope objects will be removed automatically by the container. Okay, this is what we need to understand. Okay, this is about request scope. Let's get into the PPT. So what is happening here? Let's say user controller is there, Spring IoC container is there, request data scope is there. I'm making a HTTP request 1. Let's say what is happening? It is creating a request data object, new object, and it is injecting into the user controller. Anyway, it is getting used. So what is happening? Once we get the response, what is happening? The request data object is getting cleared. Again, if I make another request called HTTP request 2, then what will happen? Again, it will create a new object. Okay, it will inject into user controller, and once it gives the response, HTTP response, then it will remove the request data object from the memory. So this is how it works. Request scope works. You got it right very clearly? Yes. Okay, so this is about request scope. Now one more thing I want to introduce you, that is, instead of using like this, we have a shortcut annotation. That is, for this request scope, we have, if you want to combine the value and proxy mode like this, we have a single annotation, that is @ directly we can use request scope like this. So if you use this annotation, request scope annotation, it will internally it will cover proxy mode, this proxy mode also. Can we check that? Yes, we can open this request scope. Here you can check scoped proxy mode. Default one is scoped proxy mode dot target class. So if you use the request scope annotation, then it is equivalent of using this one. Okay, so you can comment out this and you can restart the server. It will still work. So it is still working, right? It is changing the instance. Okay, so this is the shorthand syntax. request scope. Okay, so similarly we have session scope, application scope, so annotations for the other scopes also. So for if you see this, do we have prototype scope? Let's check that, do we have or not. We don't have, right? Do we have singleton scope? We don't have, right? But we have for request scope only, because request scope only needed proxy mode internally, right? So that's why they have added request scope. Okay, and also other scopes also, it will similarly we will have annotations for other session and application scope also. We will check that. Okay, so from now onwards we can directly use this if you want to include proxy mode. Anyway, proxy mode is required, okay, while injecting. Okay, now we will check session scope. Okay, the next scope is session scope. So session scope, for each session, for each HTTP session, that is when a user is logged in, generally we establish a session, right? Until the user logs out, in between the session a new instance will be created, and that new instance will be there in the entire session. That means once you invalidate the session, once the user log outs, then only this instance will be destroyed. Until that, this instance will be there. That means session related information, if you want to store, you can create the session scope bean. That means a new instance of the bean is created for each HTTP session. Okay, request scope is for each HTTP request, right? But a session scope is for each HTTP session. This is also limited to web aware Spring application context. That means in web applications only, in web application related Spring application context only this will work. In standalone it won't work. When it is suitable for beans holding session specific data, user session information, user session related information. If you want to store, you can use the bean which is with the scope session. Okay, how it works is, normally if you take the user controller, let's say session data class is there. Okay, session scope is there. I mean that I have defined it as session scope. What will happen is, for each user one logs in, let's say, okay, which establishes a session, right? So what will happen? It will create a new object, session data. So that will be available to the user controller. When for user 1, that means only for this session. Then when user 2 logs in, he will establish in altogether a new session, right? So again it will create a session data object, because that session is different now. So it will be useful for user controller, right? Now for user 1, whenever user 1 logs out, okay, what will happen? This session data will be gone for the user 1 session data, because there is no session, right? So for user 1 there is no session, right? Once he logs out, there is no session, right? That's why the session data object got destroyed. Okay, similarly for user 2 also, when user 2 logs out, this session data object also will be gone. So this is how it will work. Okay, can we see it practically? Yes. IDE. So the same request info data only I will use to demonstrate session. So I will make it session. This will work. Okay, and also even you can use another annotation, has a shorthand annotation, that is session scope. This is also there. We will use this one. Okay. Okay. So what will happen? For each session, it will be new one. Okay. Right. Let's restart this. So now let's do it. Okay, is it changing? Not changing, because I am in the same session, right? I am in the same session, I am making a request, so it is not changing. So we are in the same session, right? So that's why it is not changing, right? If we want a new object, then we have to open a new session. Let's run it. Let's make a HTTP call in the new session. Okay, in incognito mode it will create a new session, right? Okay, here what I'm getting, 6A 6E 6FDB, right? Here 64A98. So both are different, right? Different, right? Yes, because we have opened a new session. So when this object will be terminated, that means when it will be destroyed, once this session is invalidated after some time, by default some time limit will be there. After some time it will be changed. If you want to invalidate, then you can call invalidate method on the HTTP session object. It will invalidate, then this object will be cleared from the memory, right? So this is about session object, that means session type. Now we will understand the next one. Okay, the next one is application scope. So this is interesting. So this application scope is a global scope. That means a single instance of the bean is created for the entire web application. That means it will be shared across all sessions and requests within the web application. So it is a single instance. It is saying single instance, right? What does it mean? So when you say single instance of the bean is created for the entire web application, means even singleton also single instance only, right? Singleton class also single instance only. It will be available for the entire web application, right? But what about this application scope? Even application scope also is single instance. It will be available for the entire web application. So what is the difference between these two? We will understand anyway. So basically application scope, what will happen is, if you look at this diagram, I have a servlet context. That means web application. I have one servlet context, you know, right? So servlet context, and we have application context. So we can create any number of application contexts within the servlet context, right? So what will happen is, each application context will have its own singleton with own request scope, own session scope, everything. But when we come to application scope, it will be common to all the application contexts. That means, let's say user service needs application data. That means application data, which is application scope. Okay, so what it will do, it will ask. Then if it asks application context 1, let's say, okay, then application context will provide this application data to the user service, and it will place this in the servlet context. That means it will set the property. We have a set attribute, get attribute methods in the servlet context, right? So it will call the set attribute method in the servlet context, and it will set this object in the servlet context level. So what will happen next? Authentication service is there. Let's say it is asking the same application data from application context in the other application context, let's say. So what it will do is, this application context won't create the application data again. What it will do is, it will return the application data from the servlet context itself. That means it will read the application data from the servlet context, and the same it will inject into the authentication service. Okay, here it is duplicated, you can ignore this anyway. So here multiple components can access the same object, which is the application level. That means if you take the singleton will be single instance per application context, right? If for example there is a if you treat this application data as a singleton, then it will two application data objects will be created, one for application context 1, one for application context 2. But application is not like that. Application scope is not like that. It will be created only one time, and it will be shared across all the application context objects. That means all the containers. That means it will be global to the whole application. Okay, this is the difference. Okay, so singleton object is single instance per container, whereas application is single instance per servlet context. Singleton is single instance per application context. Application scope is single instance per servlet context. That means only one application scope object will be there for each web application, that is servlet context, right? So this is what we need to understand. So we will see it in practical. Let's get into the IDE. Yeah, so what we will do is, now here we'll make this one as application scope. I'll just comment it out. Yes, so again this application scope, again here it is using proxy mode. So session, application and request, these three require proxy mode. Okay, singleton and prototype does not require. Okay, remember this. and okay, we are good. But how can we demonstrate this one, application scope? For demonstrating application scope, we need two application contexts, right? So we need two application contexts, right, so that we can easily demonstrate. We can, and also we can say that application scope is working fine or not. We can compare with the singleton also. So if you take the singleton, we will have two instances, one for this application context, the other for this one. But if you take application scope, only we will have one instance only. Even though we use two application contexts, we will have only one instance, right? So how can we demonstrate? We need two application contexts, right? So for that, what I did is I took a Spring Boot application only. So don't worry about all this code. Definitely you will slowly learn. This video is only for demonstrating purpose only. Okay, if you know already all these concepts, if you want to still practice along with me, that is fine. Even if you don't know how to set up Spring Boot project and how to set up this dispatcher servlet like this, don't worry. Okay, so here what I am doing is, here internally this part, Spring Boot application, internally this is a Spring Boot, right? Internally it will configure one dispatcher servlet. One dispatcher servlet will be creating web application context. Okay, each dispatcher servlet will be internally creating application context, web application context. Okay, so here it is creating one. Okay, and so I'm creating one more dispatcher servlet which will create an application context. Okay, so how I am doing is, this is how I am doing. So what I am doing is, here I am creating a web application context. So this is the annotation config web application context. Okay, and I am configuring this configure class. Okay, so this is the configuration class. Okay, so this is actually, if you see this, it is actually scanning these two packages, MVC2 and model. So this MVC2 has demo controller 2. Okay, and if you go to this is internally, this part is internally creating dispatcher servlet, right? That is internally creating one more web application context, right? So that is scanning MVC package. So that means this demo controller. So this demo controller is being scanned by one application context. So demo controller 2 is being scanned by other application context. But both application context, both web application contexts are scanning request data. So that is model package. So even this one is scanning, the first web application context is scanning model package, and the other one, MVC2, so this is also scanning the same model package. Okay, scanning, that is fine. Okay, so now after this everything is done. So it has a different URL. If you start with second URL, then this is, it is configured, it is pointing to some other web application context, that is web application context 2 we can say, and this is actually doing, that is the path for this is demo controller only. Demo, if you do /demo, it will be pointing to the first web application context. So here we have two web application contexts. Okay, so what will happen is, now just let's start it. Okay, so two application contexts, in the two controllers I am actually injecting the request data, right? In the two application context I am injecting the request data. That means I am in the two controllers I am doing I'm doing injection of request data. So demo controller 2 has the request data, demo controller also has the request data, but the scope of this request data is what? Application scope, right? It will be interesting now. See, let's start this one. Okay, don't worry about the code, just this is for demonstration purpose only. So if you see this application started, right? Let's go to the browser. Okay, so this URL is for the application context 1, that is the Spring Boot is internally creating dispatcher servlet, and dispatcher servlet is creating the web application context. So from that we are actually getting this. So I'm just returning this here. If you check the controller, demo controller, I'm actually showing the instance created by the container 1. This will be injected by the container 1. Okay, let's say. Okay, so what it is giving, some instance it is giving, right? So demo 2, this demo 2 I'm triggering demo 2 path. So this is giving some other instance request data, right? So here see, I'm making a call ff591a. Here it is ff591a. Here both are same, right? Yes, both are same. What does it mean? That means both application contexts are returning the same object, right? So this one is same as this one. That means both application contexts are returning the same, right? That's what we understood, right, from the PPT. So here both application contexts are sharing the same application data object, application data scoped object, right? So this is interesting, right? Now if you see, if it is a singleton, let's say I'll make it singleton. Let's say where we can make it singleton. Here I will make it singleton. Singleton means I will just comment this word out, so it will become singleton. I will just restart the server. So two application contexts which it should return two singleton objects, right? Because singleton is nothing but it is a single instance per container, right? So let's test it. Now it became singleton. So it is giving some instance 1C5C9201, and this is pointing, it is getting the data from other application context, right? So let's run it. See, this is 3D50 ECE5, whereas this one 1C5C9201. That means these two objects are different. Even though the request data is singleton, but I am getting two different objects. Why? Because this is coming from one application context, so this is coming from other application context. In other words, this object is coming from one container, this application, that is Spring IoC container, and this object is coming from the other IoC container. But if you run this multiple times, if you make the HTTP call multiple times, you will get the same instance. That means it is a singleton. Even if you run it, if you execute it multiple times, you will get the same instance only. That means it is also singleton. But when you make it application scope, then it will be single only. Even though application contexts are different, right? Even those application contexts are different, we get the same instance only, right? 68DA, right? Here also it will return the same. See, any number of times you run, you will get the same object. Here also any number of times you run, it will give the same object. That means what? The same object is being shared in the entire application. Even though we have multiple Spring containers within the servlet context, we are getting the same object. That means the same object is set at the servlet context, is being shared by multiple application contexts. So this is at the global level. In the entire application, we will have one application scoped being like this. Okay, but singleton is not like this, right? Singleton is per application context, that is per container, right? So this is interesting, right? Yes. So this is what we need to understand with respect to the application scope, right? So what scope is left next? Yeah, so next is WebSocket scope. WebSocket scope normally we use in WebSocket based applications. So normally a new instance of the bean is created for each WebSocket connection or each WebSocket session, we can say. Normally it is suitable for beans holding WebSocket session specific data. Okay, so normally don't worry about this. So in order to demonstrate this, we need to create a WebSocket based application and we need to demo that, we can do later. But for knowledge purpose, just keep this one in mind. Okay, it is introduced in Spring 5. Okay, even application scope also introduced in Spring 5, these two. Okay, yes. Now what we will do is choosing the right scope is very, very important. Okay, we need to consider the life cycle and state requirements of your beans. We need to choose singleton for stateless beans, prototype for stateful beans with unique state, request and session for web specific data sharing, and we need to choose application scope for data shared across the entire web application, and WebSocket scope we have to use for WebSocket session specific data. So choosing the right scope is very, very important. Best practices and considerations. Be cautious when using singleton scope for beans with mutable state. If it is singleton, it is shared across the entire application, right? So if you change it through one component, then it will affect the other components. So you need to be very cautious while changing while mutating the singleton beans. Prototype also, it will lead to increased memory usage because it will create new object for each request, right? So it won't clean the memory also. That is, Spring container won't clear the memory for a prototype by default. So what we have to do, we have to clean it manually. So that's why prototype usage increases the memory usage. So use judiciously, and also avoid excessive reliance on request session scoped beans for performance reasons. Okay, so don't use request session scoped beans also excessively because it affects performance. Why? Means because For each request it has to create a request, and also for when the request is complete it has to destroy it, right? So Spring container has to perform operations on this, right? So it will be impacting performance. There are some reasons I can show you live how it affects performance, but remember this point, okay? And also test and profile your application to ensure optimal bean scope usage, okay? Because we have profile concept, and using the profiles also we can optimize the bean scope usage. This also we will see while dealing with Spring Boot profiles, okay? Conclusion: understanding and selecting appropriate bean scopes is essential for effective Spring application development, right? Do you agree with me? Yes. Choose bean scopes based on lifecycle, state and usage requirements to ensure robust and efficient application behavior. This is very, very important, okay? So this is the conclusion. So if you have any questions related to Spring bean scopes, please comment. I will try to make more videos based on your questions, okay? If you like this video, please like, share with your friends, and also don't forget to subscribe my channel. Thank you for watching.